Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mind Movers, Dental Leaders. By the way, on that note, a lot of people have been asking me, how do I find the single episodes? So if you type in Dental Leaders on Spotify and Apple as well.
Everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, you can find it. People also ask for the long form videos. Sometimes this takes a little bit longer, but drop me a DM on Instagram, which is at Dr. Rhona Eskander, and I can guide you to that. I am so thrilled because as this podcast is growing, we've had the most incredible guests. And today we have our first international guest, Hunter Michael Shepard, who is an incredible content creator. He has been helping addicts all over the world. He has also been in recovery for how many years now, Hunter?
6.5 years.
Yeah, 6.5 years. And through his own journey and process, which we'll be discussing today, he is going to be shedding a light on addiction. We actually had, Payman had someone else on the podcast, episode 210.
Yeah, Sheetal Jane.
Yeah, and she also talks openly about her own addiction, which was extremely inspiring, especially for a woman that had to turn up to work as a healthcare professional, knowing that she, was drinking, doing drugs, etc. So I'm really excited to delve into this topic further. Welcome, Hunter.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so happy to have you. Okay, Hunter, so I love to start with guests from the very, very beginning. We try not to pre-send too many questions because we want to kind of, get people on as their most honest selves. So talk to me a bit about your upbringing. So you grew up in the States. Where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
Yeah, so I grew up in a place called the Mid-Ohio Valley, which is it's where the Ohio River runs right between Ohio and West Virginia. The first 11 years of my life, I had a great childhood. My siblings were there. I have two present parents that never used drugs in front of me. My mom's, I think, drank maybe 5 times in her life or something. My life was good until I turned 12 years old. And then a lot of different stuff kind of happened at once. I had crooked teeth. Absolutely hated that about myself. I was overweight. I had this weird haircut. And I think I started to realize all of that I wasn't happy with who I was as a person at 12. And also I got prescribed to Adderall at 12 years old, a big prescription. In America, we overprescribe everything.
For ADHD?
Yeah, well, for ADD, without hyperactivity, which is what is crazy about it, because it still worked as a stimulant for me. It did help me focus, but I learned from a very, early age that I could abuse that prescription and get high from it still. And then I started to smoke weed and drink at 12 years old. And that mixture of Adderall, weed, and alcohol made me a very angry and aggressive young man.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Do you find the Adderall's overprescribed?
I find that now there's more regulations around it in the States, but I do find that the UK is 5 to 10 years behind the States in a lot of ways, and I do see that it's becoming a problem here now. Just like I see the Oxycontin and prescription pain medication is also becoming a problem here.
So did I tell you about the ADHD?
Yep.
So I got diagnosed 2 weeks ago. And I was someone, I think, just as you were describing, a lot of people would say, did you have any childhood problems? Did you get bad grades? Could you not concentrate? And I wasn't necessarily that child, maybe in my earlier years, but then I went on to be able to study really well and get the grades for dental school, right? So people are you're doing fine. But I started to notice things in my adult life. And I think I told Payman, I was you paid someone to tell you that diagnosis? I could have told you that for free. Because I think that I'm quite high functioning with it, is in I can multitask 10 things in one day, which is when people are how do you do it all? But it's the only way my brain works, functioning at 50% of 10 things to do at once rather than one thing at 100%.
Yeah.
I was offered medication and I declined for now. And I think the general consensus is that my life is under control. But I've had to use a lot of people and implement a lot of things to gain that control, especially running a dental practice. And I guess I wonder, though, could medicine be a better thing? Are you still on the medication now? And what's your thoughts?
No, actually, as somebody in recovery, you really can't take narcotics, and that's labeled as a narcotic. It's a stimulant. And a lot later in life, stimulants were my drug of choice. So to take something like that would potentially, trigger whatever, a relapse. And I just wouldn't risk it. I've learned to live with it. I am quite scattered sometimes. But like you said, I can get a lot done in one day, and I've just learned to manage it and live with it. I don't feel like you have to medicate everything,
Yeah. That's really interesting. Okay, so at 12, you recognized this was happening. And then where was the point where you felt it was becoming a problem?
It was way later. I don't think I ever truly accepted that I was like an addict until I was probably 20 to 21 years old. And there was like a lot of like chaos and stuff that happened in between 12 and then, I think my dad was the one that recognized it first. And his way of like disciplining me was to be like almost aggressive, like angry, confrontational. But like I said, I was mixing alcohol and weed and Adderall, and I was angry, and we would actually get in fights, like fist fights, and I was the aggressor from like literally 12 years old. So I also got arrested for the first time at 12 years old. Wow. So a mixture of all of these things happened, at that time.
What was going through your head at 12 when you go from being a relatively normal 11-year-old to at 12, all of this happening to you? Did you feel...
I mean, I think that, especially with being arrested, I was in fear. There was a lot of fear related to that. And the first time they put me in in a cell for 23 hours a day for a week. Wow. And I was with another person, and there was a lot of fear around like, what's going to happen pretty much. But when it came to like the drugs, the problem is I found I had all of this chaos going on in my head and in my life, and the weed and the alcohol became a solution to that chaos. It made all of that go away. It made me feel confident. It made me feel comfortable. It gave me like a thing to relate with other people. Like the town that I actually grew up in, it only had 1,200 people in it. So everybody knew everybody. I definitely wasn't one of like the popular kids. And I feel that, it helped me connect with at least, somebody else.
Something to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then where did that go drugs-wise? Did you...
Yeah,
other things?
Yeah, I did start to experiment with like psychedelics, like mushrooms, LSD, stuff like that.
Did that have a negative or a positive effect? And the reason why I say that is because we've had a lot of people on this podcast who's, and I'm particularly interested in psychedelic therapy within the medical space. And there has been quite a lot of positive reviews on how psychedelics have managed their mental health. But obviously they have to be in the right setting with the correct facilitator. What's your views or your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I won't ever say that I had a bad experience on psychedelics. I think that I abused them in a way where it wasn't normal. It wasn't okay. It was actually an addiction for me. But I do believe that psychedelics used, like you said, in the right setting, the right person, are a huge benefit to people. It's a tool that people should utilize, but it has to be in the right setting. You can't just like go off, a lot of people just like go off to some like jungle country in South America and like take whatever with whoever facilitating it. And I think that that's dangerous,
My question for you though is, under the AA umbrella, are you even allowed to do that?
I mean, I know people that do, but I personally feel that it's a bit risky, you know? I think maybe 10 years from now, when there's been enough studies done and enough evidence and proof that people can be okay, then maybe it could be a tool that's used. But for right now, it's too risky to tell. I mean, I don't know if I would gamble with it personally,
So, all right. So we're at this stage now, and I guess this was impacting school. You weren't able to go to school. How did that map out as well in your kind of like working life? And were you kicked out of home? So what happened after?
Yeah. So in between the period of 12 and 16 years old, I continued to go like in and out. I got kicked out of school a bunch. I never, I was super rebellious. We're getting fights at school, like arguments with teachers, all of that. And they would kick me out of school. And throughout that whole period of time, I would be on and off of juvenile probation. And at 15 years old, I was put into a place that, because my dad and I got in a fight like 3 or 4 times and I got in trouble for it, they actually gave me a juvenile felony. And they put me into a program that was like meant to be like my like last chance before they put me into juvenile prison. And it was only supposed to be a 4-month long program. But I actually didn't participate in the program, and it turned into an 11-month stay. So essentially, I got out after that 11 months and went like straight back to smoking weed and failing drug tests and all of that. Got kicked out of school again. And I knew that my probation officer was done dealing with me and that she was going to put me into juvenile prison. So I went on the run from home, went on the run from her. And at 16 years old, I used heroin for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Injected.
Yeah. Well, the first time I did it, I injected it. But actually, for like the next period, probably like 4 years or so, I didn't use it like that again, but eventually I did fall back into that. But the very first time I did it, I injected it. Yeah.
And do you think that that was when it was the worst in your life? That's when the addiction like propelled, or, was at its highest? Because something like heroin, you're there, you're fully into the addiction.
Well, so it wasn't a good experience the first time for me. I was like so sick. I mean, I puked for like hours. I was like nodding out, waking up, like puking. And it just wasn't a good experience. And the next day, the police found out where I was and they came and found me and put me into juvenile prison. So, which was, I was there for about 6 months or so. And I mean, it was bad. There were like 80 people riots. There were gangs in there, people that were in there for like murdering their family. I mean, it was really bad. But it was the only place that I ever had like true structure, and I was able to, I don't know if you know what a GED is, but a GED is where you test out of high school. So I was able to focus on that and like actually test out of high school. So I didn't have to go back to school whenever I was released, because school was never like a thing for me. I just couldn't do it. I was never able to stay consistent. I was always getting kicked out. And then when I was released, I was put onto, so in the state of Ohio, you can be on juvenile parole and go to juvenile prison until you turn 21. So when I was released, I was put on a juvenile parole, and I started to smoke this drug called Spice, which is like a big problem here in the UK. It's like a synthetic drug. It's bad. I mean, it's a huge problem, especially within the prison systems, because it's easy to sneak into like a prison, like undetectable or whatever. And at the time in America, they were just selling it like in corner shops. Like you could just like walk in and buy it like in any corner shop, wherever. And
it wasn't regulated at all.
It wasn't at all. It was being produced here in the UK and shipped to the US. Wow. And I started smoking it because I could pass a drug test. So, I didn't want to go back to juvenile prison. And,
so they weren't testing for it, so that was your drug of choice for that reason.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that it was as physically addictive as what it was. Okay. I mean, it like had a hold on me. Like I would, if I tried to stop using it, I would withdraw for like days, literally for days, 3-4 days at a time, trying to quit. And like worse than heroin withdrawals, all of that. It was a bad drug. Yeah.
But it's amazing as well that you were able to get, again, it just shows, we were having a discussion on last week's show about schools and how like the educational system doesn't allow people that are neurodiverse or have a different way of thinking to excel, and you have to kind of like pigeonhole yourself into a way. But like you said, like a different type of structure. I'm not recommending, that we send everyone to jail that's got ADHD, but you were able to fulfill your studies, I think that's really interesting that you were able to focus in a different way, which shows the educational system also wasn't meeting your needs. So do you feel that time in prison was quite transformational at that time? Or were you still struggling when you came out?
Oh, yeah. I went to using straight away. Straight away. I think really it was bad for me, and the only good thing that came from it was the education. That was like literally the only good thing. It introduced me to other people that were from the inner cities that I could like go buy drugs from later on in life, that I stayed connected with, like, you know, big drug dealers, and you know, kind of made me less scared to like get involved with that kind of people, because I knew them, I lived with them for, you know, months. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm somebody that believes in structure and routine and all of that. Like even now, like the rehab facility that I work with in Los Angeles, it's for young adults that are like failure to launch type people. And it's high structure, high accountability, mandatory 12 steps, AA sponsorship, like a very strict schedule. And they help people reintegrate into society, education, getting a job, all of that, and teach them how to do that. So I believe in structure and routine, and it is beneficial for people.
So Hunter, look, a lot of the conversations that I've had with people around addiction are to say that addiction is not necessarily based on the thing you're addicted to. It's the thing in your head that makes you an addict, and so on. And people say you can be addicted to anything. You were saying before, we were talking about food or gambling or
PlayStation or
whatever it is, or your phone. But the question I've got for you is, with all of your experience of having used all of these different things and having seen other people use these different things, are some of these drugs different when it comes to addiction, or is it basically the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, especially when it comes to the physical side of it, there are drugs that are a lot more physically addicting than other drugs.
So you were saying spice.
Yeah, spice.
What about fentanyl's famous for that, right?
Well, and that became one of my drugs of choice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because where I'm from is the highest overdose rate in America, the most opioid addicted place in America. So it's super easy to fall into that addiction, and fentanyl is physically one of the most addicting drugs. I mean, it's pretty brutal.
Is it more popular?
Explain what
is
fentanyl
it more
is.
Is it more important? Because I've seen the first time I heard of fentanyl was through your page.
Yeah.
And then my friend
First time you heard of fentanyl?
Yeah, come on. I've actually been teetotal my whole life. I don't know if you knew that, but as in, I have never taken. I've never been drunk even, and it's people are like, oh, is it religious? I'm like, no, my parents are Christian. Like they all drink, and I just was never drawn to it. I think I had an innate sense of self when I was young, where I just knew I had an addictive personality, and I knew that I was very prone to anxiety and depression. And seeing people self-soothe and self-medicate with drugs and alcohol actually put me off. That's what put me off.
Like I said to you, if you go to some retreat and some shaman gives you a mushroom tea, you'll have it.
Yeah, but that's different.
In the end, it's the same thing.
But listen, it's not the same thing. It's not. See, Hunter is laughing at you. By the way, you're going to get used to this banter. It's not, because, as I said, like I would do a lot of research, and I would never take anything like that. Like, would I do ayahuasca? Like, I probably would later on.
So
but I wanted. No, it's not. But I'm not doing it to get high. I'm not doing it to get. The thing is, I'm not doing it to self-soothe. I would be doing it to actually confront my inner demons and see the dark shadow side of me and do the work on that. And I would go with people that hold the space, that help you integrate. There's a difference, right?
There is.
Thank you.
And look, there's people that can use any form of drugs or alcohol in that kind of way, actually. Yeah. And then there's people like me.
I'm not so sure.
I mean, there's people that can drink a beer or a wine and like leave it for the next 6 months. You know what I mean? I'm not that kind of person. I feel like there's two different kinds of people.
But why are they drinking the alcohol in the first place? Like for me, I'm not going to do ayahuasca to go and rave in a nightclub. Like I would be doing it for mental health reasons.
Yeah.
I don't think you drink for mental health reasons. Like you do, but you do it to numb yourself.
You could. Listen, if you sat around in a circle and someone put a fire on, and then someone gave you some drink and it was alcohol, and you all wailed together, you'd feel the same thing, man.
I'm not sure. I'm going to send you to an ayahuasca retreat.
He's the expert.
I'm going to send you.
It is. There is a big difference.
Thank
but
you.
Alcohol can be used recreationally, you know.
But go on, tell us about fentanyl. Like, how bad is the physical addiction to that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends on how you're using it. Like if you're an IV fentanyl addict, you're doing it for an extended period of time. If you survive, you know, you're probably not, unless you're medicated. Like if you just try to like straight cold turkey, like from fentanyl, you're not going to sleep for weeks. Like, really? I mean, you're going to struggle to sleep for weeks. You're going to have diarrhea. You're going to be puking. You're going to have, you know, restless legs where you're like literally kicking your feet. You're not going to have any appetite at all. It's pretty brutal.
So in your experience, when someone's addicted to fentanyl, you know that's going to be a more difficult drug to get off of than
Yeah,
something
which
like-
is so common. I mean, it's the most common addiction in America right now.
Is it really?
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially during COVID. I mean, it really exploded in America. I mean, our overdose rates had to skyrocket.
And a bunch of heroin is laced with it, right?
You're gonna have a hard time finding heroin in America now.
Really?
Yeah, it's almost all fentanyl because it's like so cheap.
Easier to make and distribute and all that.
Yeah, I mean, to even bring it into America, I mean, it's so strong that they can bring in small amounts and then make big amounts out of it. And what they're doing in America right now, and it's actually starting to show up here in the UK as well. I've been reading some stuff about fentanyl showing up laced in cocaine and all of that here in the UK. They're making fake pain pills that look like a real pain pill that people could abuse, a Percocet, and they're making them out of fentanyl, and they're not mixed properly. You know, they don't know what they're doing. They're making them in some garage with like a press that turns it into a pill. And people are thinking that they're taking pain pills, but they're taking fentanyl, and it's killing people.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What about meth? We've all watched Breaking Bad. Have you had any experience of that?
Yeah, I mean, that was my drug of choice. Meth and fentanyl together were
At the same time?
Yeah. It was my drug of choice for 3 years.
Wow.
So yeah, at the end of my addiction, I was a full-blown IV fentanyl and meth addict.
So at this
IV,
point,
fentanyl, and meth.
Yeah.
Hunter, so was there a point, so I suppose then, could you sustain a job? How were you living? Were you homeless?
How were you
So what was
paying for the
happening?
drugs?
Hustling, stealing, selling drugs, hustling any way I could. So I actually, the first time that I learned to sell drugs was with the Spice. One of my best friends, he's my business partner today, sober as well. At that time we were business partners too, but in bad things, you know. And his uncle was getting like huge shipments of Spice to America and then selling it to all these from here. And we were buying Spice for 50 cents a gram. And we were selling it for $20 a gram. So we were, I mean, you know, there was a lot of money from it, but I just used every bit of...
Spending all the money to buy more drugs.
Yeah, it fueled my addiction.
And where were you living at this point?
At that point, I was living with my mom, actually.
And how was your relationship then?
She worked a lot.
Was she aware of what was going on, or you don't think so?
I'm not sure that she thought it was as bad as what it was. You know, she's pretty naive to it. Like I said earlier, she had maybe drank 10 times in her life, maybe. So she had never seen drugs. She had never seen addiction. She didn't know what was going on. I think that it was probably pretty suspicious that I constantly had people like coming and going, you know? And then actually, so during this period of time, I met my daughter's mom through that drug. And she became pregnant. Thank God she
during COVID?
No. I was like 18 turning 19.
Fine. Okay.
Yeah. And my daughter's almost 11 now. Yeah. So she stopped using the drug, and then I continued to use it until one day they made it completely illegal in America and like shut it down like completely. So overnight, it was all gone, and I was withdrawing, and I had no choice but to withdraw from it. And like literally sleeping on the bathroom floor for days because I was so sick I couldn't do anything else. And I decided at that point that I didn't care about parole. I didn't care about failing the drug test. I didn't care about like anything. And I started to use heroin. At that time it was still heroin and pain pills. Really just to get rid of the withdrawals. Like I wasn't thinking of the consequences. I just in that moment had to get rid of the withdrawals.
Yeah, of course.
And went on the run from my parole officer. And I share this story, you know, a good bit, and I think it's relative to how strong addiction is. When my daughter was born, I was full blown addicted to opiates, and like literally as she was born, I'm like holding her. And I start talking, and she wasn't crying. She like looked at me and smiled, and it was like the most beautiful moment of my life. You know, my daughter's just been born. She's smiling at me, And the addiction was so strong that I couldn't go a few hours without using. So I was like literally in the parking lot getting high before we left the hospital because I couldn't go without it. But for in a normal person's mind, they'd be thinking that would be enough to like change your life. You know, you wouldn't want to use. But I couldn't go without it, you know?
So on the notion of addiction, because I think it's something, the person that changed my views on addiction is Gabor Mate. Do you know his work? Yeah. And I talk about him a lot on the podcast. Have you read his books yet? Based on all of my recommendations.
A lot of his content, yeah.
And the reason was his book, I think, is one of the most powerful books on addiction in the realm of Hungry Ghosts. I don't know if you've read it, but he talks about, because he was a very prominent physician in Canada, worked with all the rich people, and then he decided to go completely like the opposite direction and was working with all of the drug addicts in a really poor part of Canada. And when he tells these stories about the addicts, like you say, like, you know, there'll be a woman that's addicted to heroin and she's like, I'm going to give up because now she's pregnant. And she's like, this child's going to change my life. And then she can't give up. And then like society shame her. And anyways, the whole point is that he goes into all of the biological elements of addiction. And addiction isn't just about self-soothing. There is just so much more to it. It's now been shown that like the brain and the biology of the brain and the chemicals affects people's ability to be addicted or not addicted. And I think that's when we treat it so incorrectly. Like I feel like we almost punish addicts or we look down on them rather than really understanding why they're addicted. And I think we can help it. And I know that's a lot of the work that you do as well. Yeah. But that's my understanding. And I think he was absolutely huge in making those changes and challenges because there is a biological element to it, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, it affects your nervous system, you know, to the point where it like triggers your like fight or flight. Like in that moment of me, like, you know, being at the hospital, like you start to panic, like, you know, like the adrenaline part of your body, you start to panic, like, like you're going to die almost, you know, like you can't be without it. Like you're like in fear. And I think that really a lot of that is like in fear of the physical withdrawal too. For me, I was like terrified of that and it would actually trigger like that fight or flight in me. And I was like, I need it, you know?
Yeah.
But it's so much deeper than, it's so much deeper.
Like, I just want to get high.
You come across that all the time with, I guess, family members. And is that sometimes the first step to say, hey, stop blaming the person?
Yeah, I mean, look, dealing with families, because that is something that I do now. Dealing with families is probably the hardest part of actually helping somebody. And oftentimes, and I'm not going to blame anybody, right? But oftentimes the families are the ones, the dynamic of the family is what keeps somebody sick, you know?
Really?
Because there's always different roles within a family system. And, you know, there will be people that don't want to understand it, that blame and all of these things. And then there will be an enabler, right? Mm-hmm. So you, like with my family, my dad was the one that was like constantly like trying to discipline and blame and all of that. My mom was the one like making excuses for and enabling me, you know?
I think that's the tricky thing about it as well, because sometimes so like the family wants to keep that person in a certain position. You don't know the dynamics, like are they also being abused by a family member? You know, there's like, I think it's extremely complex and leads to why certain people are addicted. And Gabor also talks about someone super famous. I don't want to say Kurt Cobain because it wasn't Kurt Cobain, it was someone else, I cannot remember, who's really famous. And he said that in that moment, I think he was also a heroin addict. He said that in that moment of like needing to do heroin, he's not even thinking about the consequences because the desperation to escape from his own reality is so much stronger than that. And that's what we fail to recognize.
But you know, if someone, if you've got a family member who's got a problem, a lot of times there is blame. Blame's a massive part of it.
People blame families all the time. They shame them.
Blame the person who's you know, the addict. And I found, you know, if you can at least get to the point of say it's an illness. Yeah. Whereas, you know, you don't blame someone for being sick, but you do blame them for having an addiction. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a common thing. And
relapsing as well. You know, that's a big thing I found. And it's really hard to have that compassion because one of my best friends, bless his soul, he is on and off crystal meth. I'd say that he is only an addict. He is an addict in a sense, but not because he does it when he's really in dark spaces. So he can go a really long period of time of not relapsing. And I think it's really hard because when he's in that dark space, he becomes like a really different person. And I can see how many people he pushes away and how many people he treats. And again, you'd think like people are like, oh, why don't you just go to rehab or fix up or something? It's just so much easier said than done. And you have to keep reminding yourself of that. It's a really tricky one. I think it's a really, really tricky one.
Crystal meth has super high relapse rates
Yeah.
as well. It triggers like a higher rate of endorphins in your brain than any other drug. So it's like so addicting, and there's a huge relapse rate with it for sure.
Tell us about the turning point.
Yeah, I
for
want to hear
you
that.
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
also it must be a big part of your work now,
Yeah.
turning people, I guess, accepting that there's an issue. Tell us about.
Yeah, tell us about the
talk
turning
us through
point.
it.
Yeah. So, and this is kind of a long-winded answer. So, on my 21st birthday, I did meth for the first time. It really was a drug that brought me to my knees quickly. Like, I say that spice was like one of the most addicting drugs I did, and that's because of the physical element of it. But meth was a drug that put me in bad situations with bad people, and it's such a overwhelming and tiring drug to use. So it very quickly took me to rock bottom, whatever you would consider rock bottom. And
Sorry, did it take you to rock bottom because the highs were so high and the lows were so low? Or did it
Yeah.
take you to rock bottom whilst you were on it? I assume not.
yeah, I mean, I think, that is partially it as well. Cause like with meth, you stay up for days at a time, and then you go into psychosis, you don't eat, you don't drink. And it's just such a powerful drug,
Are you
right?
taking it for days at a time? Is that,
yeah.
Is that how it works?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk us through it.
Yeah.
Let's say it's a Friday. You start,
Yeah.
and you're
I'm
constantly.
gonna use it all the way until Thursday, probably.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
and then Friday through Thursday, are you having the best time of your life, or
for the
what's
first
happened?
day or two, yeah, it's great.
You're just amazing,
And then it's
you feel terrible until
suffering, just suffering. But you continue to use it because you're addicted to it. What it is with meth, it lasts a long time, but the most enjoyable part of it is probably like the first hour. So you might use it, feel good for an hour, and then the next like 7
Downhill
hours are
from-
just awful.
You're kind of
Until
chasing that
yeah,
first hour.
that first hour, yeah. And
So then what happens? You haven't slept at all in that week.
yeah, literally unless I used fentanyl and I nod off for maybe 20 minutes,
And
wake up
Are
and
you hungry?
No, you know, I
haven't
saw
eaten anything?
videos of him. He's looked so.
oh yeah, literally you won't
Bones.
eat for days. Literally. And you get really dehydrated as well. So that's a bad part of it too. Like
Okay, so now on Thursday, you're just in such a state, you're going to have to stop.
yeah.
And then go on, what happens? Do you get to sleep?
I would normally, so what I would do is I would use it for days, nod off every once in a while using fentanyl, and then by the time I'm like 6 days in, I'm in psychosis and like really hallucinating and paranoid and probably locked in like some hotel room by myself, like peeking out a peephole for like
Thinking
7
the
hours
cops are
straight.
after you or whatever.
Yeah. And in reality, I'm just some addict. The cops wouldn't be looking for me. It's not like I'm doing anything like crazy,
Yeah.
And so then I would just use a bunch of like fentanyl or heroin and fall asleep, and then be asleep for 10 hours and wake up and do it again.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah.
crazy, man.
So that
Yeah.
so you were saying that was the drug that brought you onto your knees, and then what happened?
Yeah. So, I, like I said, I just was involved with bad people. A lot of like traumatic stuff happened. I mean, just awful stuff, right? And I realized in that moment that I needed help. And thank God, I have the mom that I do. And she's been an MRI tech for like 35 years. So she worked at the same hospital for like 30 years. She had health insurance. And our health insurance system in America is
terrible,
a lot.
we know.
Well, if you have health insurance, it's one of the best systems in the world,
But if you can't afford it, you die.
Well,
Literally.
I mean, it depends, right? So it depends on what state you live in. So actually, Ohio and West Virginia both have really good Medicaid. So
Is that like Obamacare in a way?
So what Obamacare is it made private healthcare more affordable to the average person. So Medicaid is actually for people that can't afford healthcare at all.
Okay.
And when it comes to addiction treatment, mental health is where it's really lacking with Medicaid or free healthcare in America. But when it comes to addiction treatment, there's so much funding in a majority of the states. Like Ohio and West Virginia, they're the two most affected states for drugs. So they have a lot of extra funding to help people. So I could have got help there regardless, but I was blessed. I had a mom that had a good job in a hospital. So I had health insurance that covered me going into treatment. So between 21 and 23, I went to treatment 6 different times.
Rehab.
Yeah, rehab 6 different times. And we have a majorly flawed system with rehabs in America. There's a lot of places that don't have good intentions. They just want to bill your insurance. They want to lie to you and tell you that they provide X, Y, and Z when they don't. A lot of them are committing insurance fraud. They're doing a lot of really bad things, right? So I kept going to programs that, and I'm not going to blame it completely on them. You know, it was me as well. Me relapsing. It was my fault as well. But I kept going to places that were not structured, didn't have any routine. They just looked nice. They were in these beautiful locations. You know, you got all this like extra stuff included with the massages and acupuncture and all that stuff, right? But they didn't actually help people get sober. You know, they weren't geared toward good clinical care and treating people appropriately. So I would go to these places, get sober for like a month to 90 days, and then I would go home and nothing changed. I was just sober. And I would relapse very quickly. And this happened over and over again. It got worse every single time I'd relapse. And the last time before I got sober now, I was able to put together 5 months of sobriety. It was the longest I'd ever had, like ever, as an adult, aside from, going to jail or whatever. And I moved back to what I was in California, went to treatment in California. I moved back to Ohio, and I relapsed because I was living at home with my parents. I lost my job. My girlfriend broke up with me all in a week, and I didn't have a solution. I didn't know what to do. Life is going to show up like when you're in recovery. And somebody showed up and they said, "Hey, look, I've got some drugs. Do you want to use with me?" And in that moment, it was my solution. 3 weeks later, I had lost 45 pounds, which is like 3 stone.
Wow.
I had picked my whole entire body. I had scabs all over my whole body, like those videos and pictures.
I saw those pictures.
Yeah, I was like delusional. I was out of my mind. I slept maybe 3 days in 3 weeks, and I was super dehydrated. It was bad. It was the least that I'd ever weighed in my whole life. I was like 165 pounds. And I was hanging out with a girl that I had stolen $200 worth of drugs from 3 years before. I like messaged her and was like, "Hey, can you give me a ride and I'll give you drugs or whatever?" And she intentionally poisoned the drugs that I was using, trying to like hurt me, with a drug called Flocka. And I did it. I was an IV addict at this point. I injected it and I blacked out for 3 days. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was. I was just like lost, gone.
And what happened to her? Did you find out that that's what she did?
Well, what happened was, I had like, it's kind of graphic, but I had a bag of meth setting out, and I was knotted out on fentanyl and Flocka, which is like bath salts. I'm not sure if you ever heard of that, or
yeah.
It's like similar to spice, but much, much stronger. It looks just like meth. So she put it into the meth that I was doing. And I literally sucked it into the needle, and I put the needle in my arm. And I remember her saying, "I fucking hate you. I fucking hate you." And I did it and blacked out.
Yeah.
Wow.
And my daughter's mom, who I'd been using with, showed up to the hotel room that we were in. And as soon as she showed up, they left. Her and this guy that was there just straight left. And, they were just going to leave me like that to, maybe potentially die or whatever was going to happen to me. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty obvious what happened, Been using the same drugs from the same people for a period of time, people I'd known for years, first time she shows up, and then I do the drugs, and then that's what happens, you know?
So what happened next?
Yeah.
So
It's like watching a riveting film. Go on, yeah, we're like, tell us more.
So my daughter's mom called my parents and said, you know, he's not okay. Like, you need to come now and take him to the hospital. So it's like the middle of the night. They show up, take me to the hospital. And that's like the videos that you see of me on my social media. My parents were recording me in the hospital because they knew I wouldn't remember and I wouldn't believe how high I was.
So at this point, did your parents know how bad the problem was?
Well, I mean, yeah, I was like, you know, I was 2 years into going to different rehabs and trying to get sober, and it got worse every single time. And they knew that I was on a relapse, and they were trying to get me like sober long enough to like be able to go back into a rehab. But this was like the worst thing that had ever happened to me at that point. And
you haven't got kids, man, but thinking that your kid, the helplessness and the worry that must be if your kid is going through that. But go ahead, sorry.
No, it's all right. Yeah, so the psychosis was so strong that and they took me home. The hospital was trying to put me into like a mental health ward, and my parents were like, he's not, you know, he needs to go to a treatment facility. So they took me home while I was like hallucinating and in psychosis. And it was so strong that I would go to sleep and wake up still in psychosis. And for 3 days, I slept in between my parents because it was the only place I felt safe. I didn't even know who they were. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know my name. I couldn't put together a sentence. Like,
potentially they're thinking he may never come out of this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they knew that I was like just like super high, you know.
When it goes on for days and days and days,
yeah. I mean, I'm sure they were in fear of it for sure, you know. But what happened was they kind of came to the conclusion that the places that I was going to were just like luxury places, and they weren't actually helping me. So they contacted the insurance company, and they said, "Hey, listen, our son has relapsed this many times. Like, we need somewhere that you recommend." And they recommended a place in Palm Springs, California, that was structured, had routine, mandatory 12-step meetings, mandatory sponsorship, somewhere I could live for like an extended period of time. And when I came out of it, because I'd been, you know, out of my mind for 3 days, I couldn't get high, so I was withdrawing. I mean, I was like full-blown withdrawals at this point. And
so withdrawals are what? Vomiting?
Yeah, vomiting, just aches, body aches, shaking, just awful. Restless legs, like literally like...
But can't they give you something to counteract that? They do with heroin, right? Like when you're coming off, they give you something to kind of...
Yeah, Suboxone or Subutex.
Yeah.
The problem is, if you take one of those drugs too soon, it puts you into something called precipitated withdrawals.
Okay.
And because what Suboxone does is it's so opioids set on your opiate receptors in your brain, and then if you take it too early, Suboxone comes in and washes it off of your receptors, and it puts you into like full-blown withdrawal. It pushes all of the drugs out of your system, and that's a really, really painful experience. Like, I mean, that's like brutal, way worse than regular withdrawals. Like you'll literally think you're dying. So normally I would only recommend using that drug if you're in a controlled setting, like in a detox facility, right? Which is where I was headed. And I made my parents drive me to the hood to get drugs, because the flight from Ohio to California is like a 5-hour flight, and I had a layover, so it was like a 7-hour trip, and I knew I wasn't going to make it unless I did something. So I'm like literally using drugs in my parents' backseat on the way to the airport for 2 hours. And I remember my dad, really, this is like a major turning point for me. My dad turned around and looked at me and he said, "Do you want to be buried or do you want to be cremated? Because if you don't stop, that's the only choice you have left."
Wow.
And that like really hit me hard, because I knew in that moment that I was literally dying. And if I wasn't going to die right then, I was going to suffer until I did. And it really hit me. And I realized that I needed to take it seriously.
But on that occasion, when you were on the way to that rehab, was your brain different? I mean, the previous 6 times, were you thinking, hey, I don't know, I might reuse, and this time you knew you wouldn't or something?
Yeah, I mean, I was terrified because of being poisoned.
Yeah.
I was terrified. But also, I was like beaten to a point of willingness. I knew that everything that I had done before wasn't working. You know, every time I went into treatment before, I was willing to at least try.
Yeah.
But at this moment, I was like, okay, you know, I'm willing to do like literally anything to stay sober.
How old were you?
I was 23.
Okay.
Crazy how she kind of did you a favor, huh?
Yeah, she did. She did. And people always ask me, like, you know, did you not try to, like, put her in jail or this and that?
She saved you in a way.
Yeah, she did. And, you know, through my own recovery, I've learned to, like, forgive her, you know,
It's
for
a
that.
massive thing.
And I heard that she's sober, too. So I hope that, you know, I hope she's doing well. It's just kind of how I feel.
What happens in rehab?
Yeah, so...
Hold on, so you made it to rehab at this point?
I did.
Stop jumping the gun. It's you're watching
He's
it
in
like
rehab.
times.
He's got to rehab.
You're like watching it times 20. Go on, yeah.
You just got to rehab. What happens in rehab?
Okay, go on.
Yeah, I did. I barely made it. I mean, by the time I got there, I was like on death's door, you know? Yeah, for the first like week, I don't even really remember it. You know, I was on Suboxone for the first week. Yeah, I was just kind of in a daze. I think it was partially because of the drugs that she had given me as well. Like, I was so unwell that I could barely even talk. Like, my voice was a whisper for like a solid like 2 weeks. Wow. Yeah, and when so I went through detox. It took about 10 days. And then I got put into what's called a sober living. It's actually not a very common thing here in the UK. It's more of a thing in the US. So I got put into sober living and I started going to outpatient treatment. And for the next like 120 days, I stayed in outpatient treatment and sober living. I went to 2 AA meetings a day, in the morning and at night. I had a sponsor. I worked the 12 steps for the first time.
Did you stick to the 12 steps the first time?
I mean, I still work the 12 steps.
Yeah, I mean, I know, but as in like you didn't relapse during the 12 steps, so you did it the whole way through.
Yeah.
I've gone with some of my friends to different types actually, to AA, NA, and another one of,
CA.
and then one of my other friends actually was doing SLAR. Do you know SLAR?
Yeah.
Sex and love addiction. Yeah. So I went with her and understood, and I think it's pretty powerful also because it's also massively recognized by psychotherapists and psychiatrists as being extremely powerful, and I think that speaks volumes. It's something that's been tried and tested for years. But yeah, go ahead. So then you were there. So also something special happened during that period of time. I was like literally 2 weeks sober and started to write about my recovery and my life and my struggles with addiction. And I started to make, it's actually kind of what got me my first like beginning of a following. I would take, you know, the pictures of me when I was like all messed up, and I would make memes out of them, like making fun of addiction, and then I would share them and they would just like go viral because I mean they were pretty bad, they were pretty raunchy. But so you never set out to gain this huge following, or did you just thought, I'll just post, and then it just suddenly came?
Yeah, it was like partially like kind of a way to hold myself accountable as well, and to give me something to do. For the first time, I like realized like, oh, I can't try to like go get a job. I can't like jump straight into a relationship, you know, and it gave me something to focus on in my like free time. So yeah, no, it just kind of, it wasn't planned. It wasn't intentional. This is way before like TikTok and Reels and all of that. It was just like written posts and like memes
Missed those
and
days.
stuff. Yeah. Yeah. People's attention span was a lot longer back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. And then I would also make like relationship memes, cause I never had like a real relationship. I'd never been with anybody for a period of time. And I would kind of like make fun of that. And people just related to it and it would just like go viral. And that's how it started.
And were you still maintaining a relationship with your daughter during this time?
Yeah. My parents would actually, like bring her to see me. But then they realized that they needed to get away from Ohio and West Virginia. So I think I was like maybe 6 months, 7 months sober, and they decided to move to Arizona to get away from the area and to support me as well. So I was able to like live with them in early recovery and like build that relationship back with my daughter. Yeah.
What do you think is the reason that Ohio and West Virginia has this drug problem?
So is it higher than anywhere else?
Oh, yeah.
You know?
That's what he was
Yeah.
thinking.
So
Yeah,
what's
oh,
the
yeah.
stats?
So the reason that it happened was because there's a lot of like blue collar workers there. A lot of people get injured, and also those people have good health insurance as well.
And they go on pain medication first.
Yeah, there were dirty doctors that were over prescribing pain medications there, specifically Oxycontin. You know, they were being incentivized to sell Oxycontin. And then there were pharmacies that were filling prescriptions without using the insurance, so you could just go pay them cash and then get your prescription. So you could use your insurance to get one and then get another one and get like double prescriptions and stuff. And that's really where it started. But then what happened was it was on the news that the federal government came in and shut down all these doctors, and they came in and the drug dealers came in and started to sell heroin to all these people that were withdrawing from the oxys. And then what happened was Mexico was like, the cartels were like, oh, well, you could put fentanyl in that and make it a lot stronger and a lot cheaper and sell more of it. So that's how fentanyl came in. And then they started to introduce like carfentanil, which is like a elephant tranquilizer. It's like a much stronger form of fentanyl that they use as an elephant tranquilizer. And then that just kind of like, it just killed whole generations of people in West Virginia and Ohio.
Like the sort of big pharma kind of angle on this.
Yeah.
And also, you know, like prison industrial complex.
Yeah.
I mean, have you got views on that? Do you think there's a conspiracy to make a bunch of drug addicts, or do you think this is just the way it's turned out because those money is such a big part of those two things?
I mean, not every state has privatized prisons, but if you look at the states that do, I mean, there's definitely like a much bigger, you know,
Relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
Really?
I mean, the private prison system in America is pretty bad.
It's a crazy idea. Do you know about this?
No, tell me. I'm like, what's
The
going on?
prison as a business. So like some company will say to the government, we'll build this massive prison for you as long as you can guarantee us 80% occupancy rate.
I mean,
and then the cops go out and try and find people to put in prison. And
Yeah.
the easiest way to do
Which
that is
is-
find drug addicts.
Yeah, but that's a huge problem, societal problem. I went to a retreat, not a psychedelic retreat, a normal one, in Costa Rica.
That's all she
Yeah.
does is go to retreats.
I'm all about the self-help.
Where at?
I went to this retreat in Costa Rica, and there was a guy there that was doing a lot of work. He owned the retreat, and one of the big things for him is that he used to be a police officer in Amsterdam, and he has immense amount of guilt with arresting people, and he's kind of like repenting his sins because now he's of like South American indigenous origin, but now what he does is he goes out to the prisons in wherever in South America, and what he recognizes is how flawed the system was, and he's like, you know, like he has such guilt about essentially what he feels like ruining people's lives, because you arrest someone, the job opportunities are gone. What's the percentage? Isn't it like 80% are more likely to commit the same crime even after they come out of prison?
Yeah, plus Hunter's saying you meet people in prison who enable you later.
Yeah, exactly. So like the system is flawed as well. And I think that goes back to the thing of like, how do we help and treat these people? Because people that have committed a crime have committed it for reasons, you know, like,
I mean, it's interesting because I feel like the Netherlands is actually probably one of the least strict on addicts and prisons and all of that. I mean, you know, even with like their healthcare system there, the Netherlands is one of the only places in the world that will fund somebody going to treatment. Like, even if you're like, you don't have anything, you're homeless, addict, all of that, you're required to have like a private form of healthcare in the Netherlands. So they'll fund that healthcare for you, and it will actually cover you going to a different country for treatment.
Yeah, I don't know what he was arresting them for, but I think the guilt was more about the arrest itself and ruining people's lives, as it were. From what you're saying, absolutely. I mean, I've talked before about Lisbon as well. Do you know Lisbon used to have one of the highest problems with heroin? And again, they used to arrest them, chuck them in jail. So then what they started doing is that they opened up these centers and they're like, cool, you want to get the heroin? Come here, because they knew at least where it was coming from. And then they'd offer them help at the same time. And if they wanted to have the help, they could. If they were there for the heroin, at least it was like clean or whatever, and the needles. And actually they ended up combating like a lot of the heroin problems because of that.
And they're starting to do that in a lot of places in Canada and the US, because at least if they're like using these drugs that are regulated by the government, like you said, they know where it's coming from, and it's actually saving people from overdosing on fentanyl. You know, and it stops like the spread of disease and all of that. If they're giving you clean needles, you're not sharing needles with other people and getting HIV or Hep C or whatever.
So now, now you've got better, you're sober.
Episode 4.
Was it this question of, right, now get into the workplace?
Yeah, I think I didn't really even try to get a job until I was about a year sober. But by that time I had, probably 30 or 40,000 followers on social media.
Oh, really?
Just from like organic, like
posting.
Everything I've done is organic and built from like the very bottom, just like learning how to go viral and capturing trends and all of that. And what happened was I got jobs working in marketing and business development and admissions for treatment facilities. So people.
But without a degree, how were you getting those jobs?
Because of his growth, right?
Yeah, because I was getting traction on social media, and they saw that I had a marketing mind, thankfully I got noticed by people that were willing to train me.
Talk about the dentistry for the dentist. How you ended up in dentistry.
Yeah, that actually, it's funny how that happened. So I started to do marketing and business development for the same facility that I work at today. And the owner, he's literally one of my best friends. And he owns a marketing agency as well. And, they knew that I was good at essentially going viral. And these dentists were hiring us for me to help them with like content creation and stuff, and to help them get their name out there and educate people and all of that. So
were you interested?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
It's super interesting, especially airway and sleep. I mean, it's crucial to your health as a whole, actually a lot of the stuff I learned really freaked me out. It made me paranoid about my own airway and sleep and all of that,
It's becoming more and more popular, people talking about that. And actually, I'm sure as well, they're linking a lot of airway problems to ADHD and children unable to sleep, and then the hyperactivity that's like related to that. And I've had some really credible, well-known dentists tell me that they were a bit unsure, tried the devices, that opened up the airways on their own kids, and said they noticed a huge difference in their behavior, which I think is really interesting. So I think it's a very interesting space.
It is.
So from dentistry to, even bigger content creation, let's talk about, where you work now, the center, how that all came about.
Yeah, so I do a couple different things. I own a business that's it's called a case management company. So like let's say a family has a son or a daughter or, husband, wife, whoever that is addicted, and they've tried everything. They can't convince them to go to treatment, just living in absolute chaos. They'll hire me and my team to come in, and we have somebody that's a case manager that will essentially assess what that person needs and what the family needs, and then we'll manage their case all the way from start to finish. And what that looks like is I'm an interventionist, so I'll fly to wherever, and essentially, or somebody that we partner with, that we work with, will do the intervention, and we'll convince that individual to go to treatment, and then we'll safely transport them to treatment. And then our case manager will kind of, manage them while they're in treatment and plug into the treatment program, but then also help the family get the resources that they need. And then sometimes, depending on the situation, we will have somebody called a companion live with that individual for like a month to 3 months and help them kind of reintegrate back into their life and their family, and make sure that they stay sober and they're achieving all the things that they need. And it's actually a highly successful system, and
Wow, amazing.
it's been used for a long time as well. There's tons of companies that provide similar services, and it's great. I love that aspect of what I do. I've been able to travel to like 10 different countries in the last like
Amazing.
year and help families from all over the world.
And so you look at, or one addict's needs very different to a different addict's.
And different ages, I suppose, right?
Yeah. I think every single family system and dynamic and every individual is different. I mean,
but does that mean that you kind of bespoke what you do for them? For instance, are there rehab facilities that suit one person more than another?
100%.
Go on.
That's the most crucial part of it.
Yeah. Go on.
Because like, let's say, an individual has an eating disorder, or they have, a certain mental health condition on top of their addiction. You have to be able, especially with eating disorders, that's a very touchy thing to treat.
Anorexia, bulimia, all that stuff.
All of it. Yeah, it's honestly, eating disorders are just as bad, if not worse, than substance addiction. And they're much harder to treat because you have to think, you don't have to have drugs to
Starve yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And you can die from an eating disorder as well. I mean, it's a pretty bad thing. So yeah, you have to be able to look at the whole, case,
the whole situation.
To determine what facility would be the right facility. There's places that are dual diagnosis. There are places that are specific to mental health, that are specific to only addiction, and they don't really treat mental health disorders.
And if insurance wasn't paying for it, what does it cost to get someone treated?
Yeah, so
on top of whatever you guys are charging, it cost
depends.
Of rehab.
It depends. So I find that a lot of people here in the UK, because bare minimum, any treatment program private program I would recommend in the UK, bare minimum costs £15,000. And that's like bare minimum. So a lot of people actually leave the UK. A place that I prefer to refer people is actually South Africa. It's a place that people travel to often from the UK anyway, so it's not unfamiliar. It's their money is worth a lot less than British pounds, so you're able to access like the highest level of healthcare for like a third of the cost or less than what it is here. So we can take a look at essentially what somebody's financial situation is.
Can it run to hundreds of thousands of dollars?
No. I mean, it could. It depends on the family and the situation, or it could be as low as £5,000.
Really?
So, but I do find a lot of the people that we deal with are people that are of a higher net worth, and actually they're the hardest people to get sober because they have unlimited amount of money to just continue to use.
They don't hit rock bottom as hard.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a really famous rehab / kind of, I don't know, it's not really a retreat, but like place in Switzerland. Yeah. And they literally charge you like £10,000 for like 5 minutes. Like it's a joke. Like you go for the week, you pay like 100K or more. Yeah. It's,
I don't want to say the name. I've actually visited some of the places over there, but
you know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's like £350,000 for a month.
Yeah, and basically, but the thing is that the repeat clients are a joke. As in, like, are people getting better because they come back and come back and come back?
It goes back to what you were saying, that there's the incentive, the financial incentive is sometimes in the wrong place, right?
Yeah. I think so. The one thing I can say about Switzerland and the treatment as a whole there is that the people that go there are going there because they value privacy.
Yes,
and
that's true.
You can't, paparazzi's illegal there.
Yeah,
and it doesn't exist.
My friend works at that clinic, used to.
Yeah. And the only one that I like there is one that actually implements group therapy, whereas the one that you're speaking of is more of an individual focus.
Yeah.
And to me, you have to have the group therapy element and have a community, because recovery is about community, in my opinion,
I agree.
At the end of my addiction, I was isolated. Nobody wanted to be around me. I was isolated. I didn't have community, and I needed that to get well.
I think community is so underrated. So as Pema said, like I'm a wellness / like healing like junkie, and I've been doing my own stuff for like a really long time, dealing with my own mind and everything. And I had like one of the most transformative experiences of my life on Saturday. I know I haven't told you about it because I haven't seen you. And I have a coach and he's brilliant. He works a lot with breathwork, and I've known like quite like a few breathwork coaches, but we did a one-on-one experience. And I had, when you see the photos of like the third eye that people talk about, I had that experience essentially. I'd never had that in my entire life. And he was like, that was your alignment. And I was like crying my eyes out. I wasn't even emotional that day, but it had accessed like a different part of my brain. And
I've had experiences like that with breathworks.
And it's crazy. And he was like, it's almost like having a hallucinogenic with breathwork. And the alignment that came as like things popped into my head that I were not necessarily like thinking about, and I was looking for answers for different things. So it can be extremely transformative. But the point is that when I started working with my coach, I was like, community, I want community. And after I'd been with like him and the facilitator, what I realized is community makes you feel seen, the right community, and making you feel seen is one of the like most primal important things in humanity. That really is the thing that makes you feel safe and loved. To make somebody feel seen is so underrated. And I was like, yeah, I just think it's
do your hands lock up whenever you do breathwork?
It was actually shaking and I went freezing. My body temperature dropped. I'm not talking about like the one that we did here for like 3 minutes. We had a breathwork coach. This was like on a different level because it was good for an hour.
What you're saying about being seen is very interesting. I was at Alicante at the weekend.
Lol.
Where they bring all the top. They basically, to be there, you had to own at least 10 dental practices. And they had these bunch of guys who had 50, 100, 250. This would come 600. Like giant business people. And we were talking about motivation, right? What is the motivation to keep going, and what is it? Why go from 1 to 6 to 200? And the notion that sometimes to be seen in a particular environment, people will give up everything else. They're sort of your patient, so that's where like to be known as the world's most famous brain surgeon. Some guy is losing his family, losing his life. Because in that one area he's seen, or businessman or whatever it is.
I don't know, because the thing is, what I'm hearing is, and I don't know, maybe Hunter will agree or disagree, I think there's to be seen for who you are authentically, and then there's to be seen for your ego. And it's like you've got to work out which is completing, because there is enough to be seen. Like, sure, like my ego, when I know now, when I'm like seen by, i.e. being validated on social media, that's completing my ego. What completes like my soul is when someone sees me like the real Rhona.
What about your 7 best friends? Isn't that enough?
No, but I think it's different, because sometimes my 7 best friends don't see me, and sometimes people can open up something in you. And that's the interesting thing, because I came back from the retreat, I was like, oh my God, I felt so seen, I felt so loved, I felt like I had this glass bubble around me. No drugs, no psychedelic, nothing, just pure like feeling like seen and loved for who I authentically am. And I came home and, I decompressed and I tried to integrate and stuff. And then I decided to see a few like girlfriends and stuff that evening. I love them. They're amazing people. They didn't do anything wrong. Do I feel they see me in the way that I felt seen that day? It's completely different.
Okay.
Where were you at, Nosara?
No, I've heard lots about Nosara. I would have loved it. This was actually just in the UK this weekend, with my breath. This was just a kind of weekend away. But again, when I went to Costa Rica, I mean, look, LA for me, people speak the language that I speak, right? It's true. But yes, I really enjoy people's ability to communicate, and I feel there's people that have done the work. What I'm struggling with in dentistry at the moment is that the corporate setup of running a business doesn't align with who I am inside. That's the real problem. And he knows I have a lot of empathy and compassion in the way that I speak, but that's not always well received with people that have never done work on themselves. They're like, what the hell is she talking about? Or like, why is she, so I think, that's kind of, that's what I find difficult. But people that have been in recovery or doing you have to do such an immense amount of work. And that's why I have mad respect, because you're really stripping away every layer to understand why you got to where you were.
No, a big part of recovery is humility as well. If you're living in ego, it's a dangerous place to be for somebody in recovery, or anybody, but especially in recovery. And you were talking about like social media and feeling validated and all that. It's funny.
I'm the worst for it. It's my addiction.
Yeah.
It's my addiction because that if I don't get validated on social media, it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm not good enough.
I mean, I love it as well. I mean, it does feel good, especially if you're like going viral and getting, you know, engagement and all of that. But like in the industry that I'm in, I'm well known because of my social media presence, because not a lot of people have that like in the treatment industry. But I try to remain so humble about it. My friends like laugh at me, like we'll go to conferences and people are like, I've seen you somewhere before. And then my friends are like, yeah, we know where, you know, but I try not to like talk about it, and you got to remain humble as well. Yeah.
It's really important for you to do that. So you said you got a business partner who's somebody that you're friends with. So what does he do in the business?
Yeah. So he's actually the case manager. He is, he's educated and trained and all of that. He's more of that type of person, like, you know, has a college education, straight A's, like super organized. Whereas I'm like kind of like to go out and like get it done and market.
Is he the BTS behind the scenes?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Which he has like a social media presence as well, and he like puts himself out there. But when it comes to our work, he's like definitely
he loves that
more
stuff. See, it's the ADHD. We like to be creative. I'm like, I have no idea where my accounts are. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Hunter, if you were the king of the world and you could change a couple of things about the prison system, the pharma system, like what comes to mind when I say that? If you could make a couple of changes to make the world a better place in this area.
I mean, I think that, you know, it would definitely piss a lot of people off, but I would definitely follow like the lead of, you know, places like Portugal, where it's like, you know,
decriminalize.
Yeah. Only with the purpose of making treatment better and more affordable and easier to access, and making that mandatory in some ways. Because I'm a firm believer in, you know, actually if treatment were a requirement for addicts instead of prison, you know, as an alternative of prison, you know, a lot more people would get better. So that's like the first thing I would do is like stop funding addicts going to prison and fund them having mandatory treatment instead. And then also that way, you know, you don't have to live with a record of, you know, criminal record of being an addict for the rest of your life, you know, and you have the ability to actually get help, you know.
That's why the guy had guilt over that. Yeah,
because I mean, there are so many people that I know that have got sober, and because of their record, they're not able to travel to certain places that they want to. Like, you can't go to America. You can't go to Australia. You know, you can't go to Canada.
Or get a certain job or whatever it is, right?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I think no matter what, though, like, I know tons of, like, people that are felons that are, like, super successful and, you know, hardworking and all of that. So I feel like you shouldn't let your history or criminal record like define like who you are. Like, you can still find a career and all of that. I mean, maybe the UK is a bit more harsh on stuff like that, but in America,
I think you're testament to everybody that tries to become a victim of their own circumstances and their reality. Sure, it might be harder, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It goes for anybody that, you know, might have come from a broken home, an abused, like, it's really hard to come out a better person, but you can do it, and you're testament to that. And we hear these stories all the time. You know, 100%. I think that's the key thing. You know, you have to be willing to put in the time, the work, and be committed to that. I think that's absolutely key. So what does the future hold?
I'm just going to keep creating content and keep helping people and build my team bigger and get better at what I do and just continue to try to make a difference, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most fulfilling thing to me is, you know, when people message me 2 years later and they say, you know, I'm still sober, I'm living a good life, or family members message me saying thank you for what you've done. And to me, that's like worth more than anything in the world.
Yeah.
How does someone get in touch?
Yes.
I have a website, huntermichaelshepard.com. That's also like on all social media platforms, Hunter Michael Shepard. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, I post literally everywhere, and I'm actually the one that responds to every single message as well. I have an assistant that reminds me sometimes, but I'm the one that responds to every message, sometimes hundreds a month, but I'm going through every single one if I can and responding.
What's the name of the company or the service?
Yeah, so it's called White Oak Case Management. And then also I work, the facility I work directly at is called Oak Forest Recovery, and that's in Thousand Oaks, California.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Hunter, it's been such an honor. I'm honestly so privileged that we've had our first from like the other side of the pond guest who's been incredibly inspirational and, you know, an incredible storyteller and so wonderful. So thank you very much. And I've loved it. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.